we'd like to record this meeting. It'll be helpful to us as we go back and are learning from you how we can continue to improve upon and do more outreach and so on with the Pine Tree Amendment campaign. So I hope if anyone has a problem with that, if you could send me a note in the chat box and we will change our mind. All right, let's get started. First of all, I want to welcome you all to this Lunch and Learn on the Pine Tree Amendment. We're really glad you could be with us today. I'm Andy Burt, and I'm the co-coordinator for the Pine Tree Amendment campaign, along with Michelle Henkin of New Harbor. And we have a steering committee of folks who will be introducing themselves when we do introductions a little later. We're thrilled at this busy time of year with the legislature and people preparing for summer visitors that you've joined us to learn more about the Environmental Rights Amendment in the Maine Constitution, the Pine Tree Amendment, and how it could enhance and protect the health of our environment, which is so fundamental to not only our personal health, but Maine's nature-based economy. As we've been discovering over the last few months that we've been publicly working on the amendment campaign, legislators and Maine people of all political persuasions, regions, and cultural and generational identities are in firm support of this idea. They're surprised actually to learn that these basic requirements for life, clean air, clean water, and a healthy environment aren't already inalienable rights for us to enjoy. So with the Pine Tree Amendment, we feel we can really make it so. So before we do introductions, I'd like to introduce Senator Chloe Maxman, who represents District 13 and is the sponsor and legislative champion for the Pine Tree Amendment. She's going to give us a little update on what's happening in the legislature. She is stepping out of a hearing that's happening right now, and so she'll just be with us briefly. Okay, thank you, Senator Maxman, for being with us.
Thank you, Andy. It's so good to see everyone and be on here this morning with you. I just wanted to hop on quickly and say thank you for joining to learn a little bit more about the Pine Tree Amendment. We've all been working so hard on it, making sure it has a solid shot as any in the legislature this session. One of the reasons that I put it in is because there are so many good environmental laws on the books in Maine and so many laws going through this session, and I want to make sure that they stay there. I've just been really I guess destabilized by how quickly administrations, whether it's president or governor, can change policy courses so quickly. And I don't think that our environmental protection and the foundation of our economy should be subject to political whim like that. And so the Pine Tree Amendment is our backstop. It's how we hold government accountable and make sure that we keep Maine. So I've been working really hard on my end to make sure that we have the votes. I think we have 2/3 in the Senate. We also need 2/3 in the House, and that is where we're putting a lot of our energy right now. We've had some really amazing conversations with our Republican colleagues and really working hard to make sure that the resources are there to understand what this does and what it means and how it's actually going to protect Maine and our businesses and not be a large threat. I often think about what would be happening if we were trying to pass a right to bear arms right now or a right to free speech and what the conversations around that would be like. And those are rights that we take so for granted these days, that they're just so ingrained into our lives. But when it comes to the basic necessities of what we need to survive, those are not in our Constitution. So something's got to change, and we'll let everyone else take it from here in terms of how we're going to be moving forward.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Chloe. Really appreciate you being here, and carry on. Thank you. All right, now what we'd like to do is to just do, I'll just quickly look at the agenda so you can see what's in store for us this morning. We'll be having brief introductions, that's for all of us. And then Maya von Rossum is going to be telling us how passing this Pine Tree Amendment could really support our business community here in Maine. And then we are going to have a Q&A roundtable discussion. We are really interested in what you think, where you think this Pine Tree Amendment could really be important for the business community. So we're looking for a real exchange among us. And so because we're a small group, we'll keep it pretty informal. And if you have questions as Maya does her presentation, please, raise your hand or put a question in the chat. And Maya and Sue Inches, who will be facilitating the Q&A roundtable, will be watching for those questions and call on you to ask them. So why don't we start with just everyone introducing themselves, your business or organization, and what role you play in that business or organization, and specifically what you would like to learn today, as you've heard maybe a little bit about what the Pine Tree Amendment is about, but what are some of your questions? So why don't we start with Beth Polhemus.
Well, hello there. Yeah, I hail from New Harbor and have a business down here in Pembroke Harbor called the Contented Soul, but have been a business owner in one capacity or another within hospitality, had an inn for a long time. So over 30 years. And for me, this is it's an easy sell because our businesses have always been dependent upon Maine's big attraction. It's an environment. So yeah, I'm just excited to be able to listen to all of you guys and find out what you think and how you think we can best participate in support of this. So that's me.
Great, thanks, Beth. Phil, would you like to go next? Phil Coop.
You're on mute, Phil.
Thanks for that, Andy. I always can use that reminder. Good morning, everyone. I'm Phil Coop. I'm one of the co-founders of Revision Energy. We have facilities in South Portland, Maine, and up in Montville, Maine. And we are trying to eliminate fossil fuels and carbon emissions in northern New England. I am kind of a managing partner focused on leadership and sales and marketing. And my big project I'm working on is I'm trying to replace the Citgo sign down in Boston with a Revision Energy sign.
I know the sign. It's an iconic thing.
The funny thing is that I'm serious.
Yeah. Well, that's great. We'll make a big celebration of that, Phil. That sounds wonderful. All right, Amy Winston.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, my name is Amy Winston. I work on state policy for Coastal Enterprises, CEI, and our mission is we finance and advise small businesses and integrate that with some policy advocacy in support of our mission, which is to grow good jobs at environmentally sustainable enterprises, to promote shared prosperity in Maine so that the economy works for everyone. And I'm interested in listening in. I've been interested in the amendment since I saw the title, and just wanted to hear what's happening and the arguments, the business arguments around it. And thanks for doing this.
Great. Well, how about if people on the steering committee introduce themselves? Michelle, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, my name is Michelle Henkin. I live in New Harbor, and I got involved with the Pine Tree Amendment when I read Maya Van Rossum's book about the Green Amendment, and thought it sounded like a great idea for Maine to take up, and contacted Andy, who thought it was a good idea. And knowing Andy's long-standing activism in the state, I figured if she thought it was a good idea, then it was definitely a good idea. And we got in touch with Chloe Maxman, who thought it was a great idea. And so we, that's how we got where we are now. We've just been moving forward, connecting with people and bringing them on board to this this idea that's really, I think, quite transformational in terms of how the environment can be protected.
Thanks, Michelle. Sue?
Yes. So hi, everybody. I'm Sue Inches. Most of you know me. Beth, nice to meet you. I don't know you. Yeah, so I've been an environmental advocate for many years and served in state government as a lobbyist for Governor Baldacci, actually, for 7 years. But the way I came in contact with the Green Amendment was that during the COVID period, all of last year, I was writing a book on environmental advocacy, and I came across Maya Van Rossum's work on the Green Amendment across the country and did some research on it, and was also thought, as Michelle said, that it's a transformational idea. So I was a little familiar with it. And then I teach advocacy skills at colleges. And so in January, I was teaching at Colby, and I invited Senator Maxman to address our class. And of course, I had kind of briefed the class about the Green Amendment, so they were asking her all about it. So it was really fun. We got to, both myself and the students all got to learn more about it right directly from Senator Maxman, who zoomed into our class in January. So it seemed obvious from then that of course, I know Andy well, and that I would want to join this steering committee and support the effort to try to get this Pine Tree Amendment passed in our state. So that's kind of how I've been woven into this effort.
Great. Rich Kilmer.
Hi, I'm Rich Kilmer, retired Presbyterian minister living in Yarmouth. I do a fair amount of writing for newspapers in Maine and elsewhere, actually. And between Sue Inches and myself, we've had 3 op-eds published on the Pine Tree Amendment, and I'll have a 4th this week in the PPH.
Great. Thanks, Rich. Let's see, Carly.
Hi there, everybody. I'm Carly Woods. I'm a member of Maine Climate Action Now, and that's how I met Andy, and we connected over the Pine Tree Amendment a few months ago. That's when I learned about it. And I do freelance graphic design, so I've been helping support a lot of the communications and branding for this movement, and it's been really fun. It's nice to see you all.
Yeah. Thanks, Carly. Carly is our wonderful, has created a fabulous website and other Instagram and other social media aspects that we've been doing. So Colleen.
Hi, everyone. My name's Colleen. I work full-time for Maya at Green Amendments for the Generations. So it's so great to be a part of the Maine kind of team here and seeing how it progresses in Maine and how that's informing us in other places too.
Great. Well, last but not least is I'm very pleased that today we have Maya van Rossum as to give us a presentation about the Green Amendment movement and the Pine Tree Amendment, specifically how it can help businesses here in Maine. We've partnered with Maya and her organization from the very beginning. She's brought her knowledge and expertise on environmental and constitutional law to our Pine Tree Amendment campaign. She's been the Delaware River Keeper for more than 26 years and founded this movement. And as Michelle said, wrote a fantastic book, which more and more people are picking up and reading and are inspired by. So thanks, Maya, so much for, again, joining us and bringing us a presentation.
No. Okay, I turned off mute now, just double checking. So after such a fabulous introduction, I will skip right over that. What I really want to say is, what a fabulous team I've had the honor of working with, here in Maine. Andy and Michelle, Sue, Carly, Rich are just amazing, amazing people. And you probably all in Maine already know that, but they're just really powerful, passionate, compelling, convincing people who are going to be successful in securing a Pine Tree Amendment in the great state of Maine. I want Phil to know, Phil, I am standing in an all-electric house with my all-electric car outside, including my charging port and my solar panels on my roof. So I am living your message. And just wanted you to be aware of that. This is all being powered by the sun.
Well done, Maya.
So I want to be there when you get that Sitco sign going.
Awesome.
So let me just jump right in. You'll see this slide again later, but just really want to acknowledge what you all already know, how incredibly important a healthy environment is to the enjoyment of the lives of the people in Maine, their health, their safety, but also, of course, in terms of the economy. That Maine's healthy environment is just irreplaceably important, as you business leaders in the state all know. And it's not, again, not just economically important, but it's important to the people of Maine. They truly, truly, truly value the clean and healthy environments that exist in the state. And that is really, it is those truths that bring us to this conversation of how do we advance a new path for environmental protection here in the state of Maine. Because while there is a pre-existing system of laws and agencies and policies and programs in Maine that really are all dedicated to protecting the natural resources and the environments of Maine for the people and for the economy, we also know that there's a gap in the effectiveness of these laws. We can just look at the news headlines and we can see that there are still water contamination, air pollution, species, and of course, climate change issues that are impacting the people of Maine and that need a way to be addressed even under this current system of laws. And so that's what we're here to talk about. That's what the Pine Tree Amendment does. This is the amendment. I thought that it would be really helpful to just take a second for us to read together what the amendment says so that it's really top of mind for everybody. That Article 1, Section 25 would be added to the Maine Constitution and would read that the people of Maine have the right to a clean and healthy environment and to the preservation of the natural, cultural, and healthful qualities of the environment. That the state may not infringe upon these rights, and that the state shall conserve, protect, and maintain Maine's natural resources, including but not limited to its air, water, land, and ecosystems for the benefit of all the people, including generations to come. What the Pine Tree Amendment does, very simply, is it takes the rights of the people of Maine to clean water, clean air, a stable climate, and a healthy environment, and it raises them up. So they are legally and constitutionally on par with those other fundamental rights we hold dear, like the right to free speech and freedom of religion, like private property rights and due process rights. I mean, we all know how powerfully these rights are protected because they are recognized and protected in the Bill of Rights section of our state and federal constitutions. Well, now that same legal power and strength comes to bear on the environmental rights of the people of Maine. Maine's Pine Tree Amendment is, or the Pine Tree Amendment is Maine's version of what I call a Green Amendment. And as Andy said, my Green Amendment work and the national movement is an outgrowth of my work in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, where we, of my work in Pennsylvania. Let's leave it there. But one of the things I want you to know is that in order to have this highest constitutional strength and protection for the environment, not just any language in the Constitution will do. In fact, there are 44 states that talk about the environment in their constitutions, but they don't give this same highest recognition and protection that we're talking about with the Pine Tree Amendment. The essential elements to secure that highest protection all exist in the Pine Tree Amendment, namely, notably, that the language is placed in the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution. So we really are raising up these fundamental rights, that the rights are recognized as belonging to all people, including future generations, that we are clear about the kinds of resources that we're talking about, the right to access clean water and clean air and healthy environments. That the language itself is what's known as self-executing, meaning that it has legal strength as soon as it's added to the Constitution, and that it applies throughout government in the state, from the local town council all the way up to the legislature and the governor's office. These are all essential, irreplaceable elements to getting that highest protection, and they all exist in Maine's Pine Tree Amendment. Now, there are right now actually already 2 states, but only 2 states, that give this highest constitutional recognition and protection to environmental rights. One of them is Pennsylvania, and that is in part due to an outgrowth of my work in that state, and the other is Montana. But since we've been advancing our new National Green Amendment movement, we are getting just amazing interest and energy from states across the nation. And at this point, there are already 13 states that have put forth their own state version of a Green Amendment of what we call in Maine, the Pine Tree Amendment. So this is a really powerful movement that's growing. And I want you to know that, while Maine is recognized on so many fronts as a leader in terms of environmental and natural resources protection, number 4 for eco-friendly behaviors, number 11 for putting the environment first, number 14 for its natural resources and environmental protection. When it comes to this Green Amendment movement, Maine is at the forefront. Right? Maine is really amongst the states that is at the front of the line and being recognized nationwide as a true leader. People are looking at what's happening in this state, at the power and the energy, and just being truly inspired by it. And I think that is such a wonderful part of Maine's story is the tremendous leadership that's being demonstrated here. I want to go really quickly, just over broad strokes of how a Green Amendment will change things. I'm going to acknowledge some of the business benefits, and I do have some examples of specific values or cases where businesses were benefited from Green Amendment language in Pennsylvania and Montana, but I'm not going to hop to those unless you really are desirous of hearing them. I thought it might be better to just do the broad strokes, and then we'll just dive in more deeply depending on what you're interested in hearing about or sharing with us. But broad strokes, what the Pine Tree Amendment does, what it accomplishes, is really raising up environmental rights so they are on par with those fundamental rights. When we think about people who believe that their property rights are being infringed upon, we can see and understand how powerfully the law rises up to defend their property rights, and how passionately people rise up to defend their own property rights because they understand that it is an inalienable right recognized and protected in the Constitution. Well, that same passion and legal power does now come to bear for the rights to clean water, clean air, and healthy environments. It reorients government decision-making, so it is necessarily focused on prevention of environmental pollution and degradation throughout the government decision-making process. So whether the legislature is legislating, the agencies are regulating, whether there's consideration of issuing a permit, in all of these important government activities, consideration of how do we protect the environment from harm comes right to the front of the line in terms of the decision-making process. Because as we all know, it is much easier to avoid environmental harm than remedy the ramifications after the fact. So this is incredibly powerful from an incredibly powerful outgrowth of having the Pine Tree Amendment in Maine. It really makes sure that when government is engaged in decision-making, that it truly is thinking about existing conditions that are already facing an environment or a community. What harms are they already being impacted by? What does science have to say about the decision or the action that's about to make? If we issue this permit, if we pass this law, if we pass or roll back this regulation, what will be the cumulative impacts for the environment, for the community, for economic development in the state? All of that now actually becomes an enforceable part of the decision-making process, not just something that we hope government will do, but something that government becomes constitutionally required to do. Environmental justice is incredibly strengthened by a Green Amendment because we now all have the same constitutional right. Regardless of our race or our ethnicity or our socioeconomic status, we all have the same constitutional right to a healthy environment. And so when there is infringement, there is now an additional point of strength that environmental justice communities can bring to their efforts to secure protection for their own communities in terms of their water, their air, and their environments. I want to assure you that a Green Amendment is not about a battle of neighbor versus neighbor, right? We're not going to see legal actions of a downstream property owner suing an upstream farmer based on the Pine Tree Amendment. This amendment is really focused on the actions and the activities of government, making sure that government is doing a good job, the right job when it comes to protecting the natural resources for all the people of Maine and giving people a tool to hold government accountable when there's a problem. The real goal of a Green Amendment is to help government do a better job at environmental protection. But the reality of a Green Amendment is that when our government officials do get it wrong for whatever reason, there is now the opportunity to get into the courtroom for the people to defend and vindicate their rights to a clean and healthy environment. The issue about economic development, we often hear when people are concerned about the passage of a Green Amendment or the Pine Tree Amendment, that somehow it is going to have devastating consequences for economic development in the state. And this issue has actually been raised multiple times in Pennsylvania and Montana. And the courts have been very, very clear that constitutional environmental rights are not about stagnating economic development, right? It's not about derailing economic development. It's just about ensuring that economic development advances in a way that is also environmentally protective. And your businesses, that's what you're all about, right? So this becomes a really strong, powerful legal tool and visionary tool, to just make the case for the important works that you do in terms of your own businesses and business operations. Because we all know, right? We all know that you can advance strong economic development and protect the environment at the same time. And in fact, there is no better way to enhance economic development in the state than to do it in a way that is environmentally protective. Right? Again, I'm coming back to that original slide. We know that here in the state of Maine, that one of the reasons why Maine's economy is strong is because of the clean and healthy environment that exists in Maine and all of the wonderful values that it provides. We know that this is my own beautiful Delaware River. Just the Delaware River alone provides $22 billion of annual economic value in our region. The Clean Air Act, preserving and protecting the air, has injected tremendous economic value into the environment. No matter what aspect of the environment you're looking at, water, air, soils, whatever, right? When you do it in a way that's environmentally sustainable, it really contributes back economically to the community and to businesses. And it saves money, right? When we protect the environment, we don't have to invest in cleaning up pollution in order to do things like provide clean drinking water. We don't have to invest in responding to growing flooding and flood damages because we've avoided the harm and the economic costs that come, the economic consequences that come from environmental degradation and devastation. But of course, it's not just about the dollars and the cents, right? It's about the real people. I mean, this community of Eastwick, this is a community of Eastwick that has suffered tremendously from flooding and flood damages. Protecting upstream in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, in part based on things like Pennsylvania's Green Amendment, has been really important for protecting communities like Eastwick. And we're saving lives, right? We are not contaminating people's bodies in ways that is giving them cancer, that is making them suffer very serious health consequences. And of course, there are so many ways that the environment, a healthy environment, benefits us that we don't even think about. For example, preserving the horseshoe crab populations that exist on the East Coast is incredibly important for advancing in a sustainable way things like safe vaccines, right? It is the blood of the horseshoe crab that is drawn in a non-lethal manner that is used to test things like the vaccines that very literally are important to the health and safety of communities, not just across America, but across the nation. And so we can't go into, we can't go into all the many ways that a clean and healthy environment protects us and benefits us, but we do know that when we best protect our environment, we best protect ourselves at every single turn. And this is what a Pine Tree Amendment helps us accomplish. It helps us secure a clean and healthy environment here in the state of Maine proactively, but also giving us a defensive tool against inappropriate government action when we need it. So with that, that's just a little summary of the Pine Tree Amendment, and I hope that you find it worthy of your support, and we really look forward to hearing from you any questions you have, any concerns you have, or any ideas you have for how we can continue to advance this conversation in Maine. And I will stop my share.
You're on mute, Andy.
Thank you.
I could see your mouth moving, but I couldn't hear you.
I know there are many times some people wish that that was all that happened. But seriously, I think we had a few slides of just folks who are already on board with the amendment before we get to the Q&A. Can we just cue those up? We thought people would be interested to see who are some of our folks that are on board. Representative Justin Fecteau has been a strong supporter of the Pine Tree Amendment and is working very hard with Chloe Maxman now to secure support in his Republican caucus for this issue. And as I said, we've been finding that the amendment is bringing people together across political lines and so on. Next slide, please. Again, Senator Rick Bennett, who testified, has been a sponsor, and has been a very strong supporter in the Senate for the Pine Tree Amendment. His words are really powerful in the way he has talked about how it really is about supporting the values that we all hold dear here with our environment. Next slide. Right from the beginning, we actually consulted with Maine's tribal communities as well as with youth, because our feeling was that these are folks who not only for millennia have been caring for the environment, stewarding it as their relatives, but the young people coming along have been among the strongest and loudest voices around climate change and preserving the future that they will live. So it was important for us to talk to them right from the beginning and consult them on the language. And finally, here is one of the youth, Jess Cooper, who has made some very compelling testimony. She's a young mom whose daughter has health issues that really require the Addie to be outside in a clean environment and ability to access safe and local foods. So that is it. Sue, take it away. There are many, many more. That's just a little selection that we pulled together.
That's great, Andy. So I'm going to be the moderator for our next segment, which is basically questions and answers, but also we're hoping that you might have ideas to help us. So we've made tremendous progress, as you've heard, with the Green Amendment called the Pine Tree Amendment in Maine. I mean, we kind of bolted out of the box in the late fall with a bill, and we hadn't done really much organizing before it was introduced. And so it's been pretty good that we think we have 2/3 in the Senate. We're working really hard to contact representatives in the House, and especially need Republicans to support this, because this is a constitutional amendment. So it needs a 2/3 majority in both the House and Senate. And that then enables it to go to voter referendum. And then voters have to approve it by a majority. So that's the process for making an amendment to the state constitution. And it's a bit of a heavy lift, which it should be. But we're hoping that you might have a few ideas to help us gain more support for this. So we're interested in your comments as well as your questions. And so I'll just open the floor to see what questions you have, and we will do our best to answer them. And you can just speak up, or you can put it in the chat. I got the chat box open now, but if I can pretty much see everybody, if you want to also just chime in and go off mute. And while we kind of wait for that, there are a few other comments that I can make. One is that, and this is in support of something Maya said earlier, is that a constitutional amendment is fairly permanent because it's so hard to change. And I really like that, because back in 2009, 2010, we passed some legislation called Quality of Place. And the purpose of that legislation was to make the environment, Maine's environment, part of all economic development planning. We had established a Quality of Place Council that would do that. And it took 2 years to lobby this and pass it, which we did in 2010. And then in 2011, the newly elected Paul LePage repealed the entire thing. So it's just such a great example of, a lot of people worked really hard to put this Quality of Place legislation in place in Maine statute, only to have it overturned literally just 1 year later. So we never were able to actually carry out everything in the new law. So this, to me, is why we need a constitutional amendment. We don't want our environment to be kind of up for grabs depending on the political climate of the day. So I think that's a really important point. So any questions from people? We can talk about, there is case law. So any constitutional amendments are usually established as cases come up. and get decided. And there are cases from Montana and from Pennsylvania that illustrate how the Pine Tree Amendment has actually been used and could possibly be similarly used in Maine. So we could talk about that if people are interested in hearing about that. Oh, I see some chat questions. What's the hope for timeline in passing the Pine Tree Amendment? Anybody want to take that one on? It's a several year process anyway. The question is whether we pass it right now in this legislature and go right to referendum in the fall, which would be next November, or if we don't get the 2/3, then we'd have to either table it for next January or even reinitiate it the next year. So it depends a little bit on the result, but we would sure like to pass it right now if we could. That would be the best possible outcome, and you can help us do it. Next question I see in the chat from Amy is, let's see, well, this is from Phil actually, who is opposing it? So there hasn't been organized opposition, but there has been some testimony against it. In particular, the Maine Forest Products Council. And I think that, and others can chime in here, but I think that they use a lot of chemical management of the forest lands. And I think they feel that that could be something that under the Pine Tree Amendment could be curtailed. So I think that's probably their reasoning in opposing it. We did have opposing testimony from the Maine Municipal Association, and subsequently we've met with them, and I think they may come around and support us. And the reason is that they always oppose anything that they think will cost the towns money. And that's fair because towns don't have the ability to raise a lot of funds. But in this case, the Pine Tree Amendment has actually been used to uphold local ordinances. So, for example, in Maine, there have been a number of cases where it might have helped to have a Pine Tree Amendment, thinking about South Portland. And, they had emissions from the oil tank farm down there. And if there was a Pine Tree Amendment in place, it might have been easier to challenge that. They are challenging it through the DEP, but this is an additional tool that can uphold harm. And Maya, I see your hand up. Please add.
Yeah, thank you so much. So Phil, amongst the other things, so I think Sue did a great job of identifying some of the specific parties that have spoken up in opposition. But what we're hearing about the Pine Tree in terms of opposition to the Pine Tree Amendment is frankly the same kind of opposition we hear in other states. And it's all opposition that's relatively easy to overcome. So at least for people who want to, listen to the facts. So, one of the things that we often hear about the Pine Tree Amendment is that the language is too broad. What is a clean and healthy environment, right? Like what is clean water and clean air? And the response there is that Bill of Rights language, no matter what kind of right you're talking about, is always broad. And when you look at the kind of language that is included in the Pine Tree Amendment, it is very characteristic of Bill of Rights language. It is similarly broad when compared to other rights, like the right to freely speak, the right to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures. These are all broad terms that get their definition through the governmental process, first with the legislature and the executive branch, and then ultimately sometimes through the courts. We, Sue mentioned, concerns about economic development. And we talked a little bit about the economic values of a healthy environment, and you all are certainly well aware of that. And one of the other common refrains is that this is going to result in a lot of litigation. We're going to have some make work project for lawyers. And the truth is what we can see in Pennsylvania and Montana is the number of cases that get brought forth based upon constitutional environmental rights language ranges from 3 to 9 cases a year. And these are in fact legal actions that would have been brought forth anyway. They're based on some other legal claims, and then the constitutional claim gets added to something that's pre-existing, maybe to help interpret existing law or help persuade the court why a failure of government to behave in a certain way is constitutionally problematic. So those are some of the challenges we hear, and like I said, they're all we have good answers to all of them.
So here's an interesting example. I was just reading in the paper this week that I think every town that the CMP corridor goes through has voted resolutions that they object to this project. And yet they don't have right now any way to challenge the project legally because Central Maine Power has eminent domain authority for building transmission lines. Well, the Pine Tree Amendment, and this is just speculation at this point, but if environmental harm could be shown or proven, the towns actually might have a case. So there's an example. I'm thinking about, power lines, they often spray herbicides to kill all the vegetation. There actually might possibly be a way to use the Pine Tree Amendment to give the towns a little bit more legal power to challenge that project that they are not wanting to go through their towns. So I think, you can't predict all of the applications that would happen in Maine, but basically if there can be environmental health harm shown, then there's possibly a case there. So, and Maya, maybe you want to talk about, because one of the questions is that Amy has is about case law that's been precedent, have been set. And maybe you want to talk about that in Pennsylvania Amendment, Article 13 and all of that.
Great, thank you. And I'll do just a couple of references to give you some sense of how the Constitutional Environmental Rights Amendment language has been used in Pennsylvania and Montana. So, for example, one of the first most powerful uses in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania was actually brought by myself and my organization, and is what really invigorated and inspired me to start this national movement. There was a piece of legislation that was passed by the Pennsylvania legislature that was excruciatingly pro-industry. It was actually the fracking industry. And it overrode, it ensured, or it put in place automatic waivers from environmental protection standards that would apply to the industry. It overrode local zoning and mandated that drilling and fracking operations be allowed to happen in the heart of residential communities, despite that zoning would prohibit any other kind of industry from construct or operating in those kinds of locations, and more. And long story short, we challenged that legislation as being a violation of Pennsylvania's Constitutional Environmental Rights Amendment, and saying that implementing this law would have resulted in a violation of the rights of the people to pure water, clean air, and a healthy environment. And be absent the Constitutional Environmental Rights Amendment language, there would have been no way to challenge this law that was really meaningful, at least not the elements that we were challenging. And because we had the Green Amendment language in Pennsylvania, we were actually able to get that law to be declared unconstitutional. So before any of the harm was even inflicted in terms of exacerbating fracking problems in the state, it was prevented. We're using the law right now to challenge the failure of state government to, for over 30 years, despite recognizing the supersaturated toxic condition of a hazardous site with a spreading pollution plume, despite the fact that the state has recognized the environmental and the health and safety dangers of this toxic site, the state has done nothing to clean it up. In fact, what it did do was negotiate a sweetheart deal with the developer that would allow this toxic site to be developed while it remained toxic. We've brought the argument to say that that failure, in the absence of that knowledge, that failure to clean up the site is a violation of the constitutional rights of the people in the impacted communities. And so far, the states have agreed with us. In Montana, there have been two situations, very separate situations, years apart, where permitting had been issued to advance very dangerous industrial gold mining operations. In one case, most recently, just outside of Yellowstone National Park. And in recognition of both the environmental consequences, but also the economic consequences from the environmental degradation that was likely to result from the advancement of that gold mining operation if the permit was allowed to remain legally alive. The court actually said that there was a violation of the Montana Green Amendment, and in both of these separate situations, the permitting was voided or rescinded. So those are just a couple of examples. Failure to clean up a toxic site, challenge of a highly damaging, inappropriate law that was passed, rescission of inappropriate permitting with demonstrable environmental consequences that would also result in economic consequences. And just one other thing that just happened, and Sue made a comment about a power line and herbiciding use that reminded me of that, was very recently an administrative law judge that's part of the Public Utility Commission in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania made a recommendation against providing approvals for 2 high-powered transmission lines from being allowed to cut through some Pennsylvania counties based on 2 pieces. One, the significant environmental and community consequences, among them, the ramifications of herbiciding that would be part of the construction and operation of the power line, the consequences of that herbiciding for organic farms and farming, property value implications, ecotourism implications, implications to habitat and wildlife. That coupled with the failure of the company to really demonstrate an actual need for the energy that they would be advancing. So the Green Amendment in Pennsylvania was a really important part of that decision to say you should not approve this power line. And again, that seems awfully reminiscent to the project Sue mentioned.
Mm-hmm. That's great, Maya. Thank you. Are there other comments or questions or things you'd like us to talk to you about? Yes. Is there a retroactive, this is from Beth, is there a retroactive component or obligation, or is this only applicable to future actions? Great question, Maya. Go ahead on that one.
So there are a couple of ways. This is not just proactive. It's not just about, it is looking forward, but it does provide an opportunity to remedy existing harm. So there's the toxic site situation that I just mentioned, right? Long ignored toxic contamination that the state was aware of. The failure to act is actually a decision not to act. In every single situation, what you have to do is look for the government action. And that is what you are challenging, is a government action or failure to act that's resulting in the environmental rights consequences. So in that case, the failure to clean up the site in light of the known spreading pollution plume and the science and the impacts, that failure to act is what was the constitutional violation. In other situations where, let's say, for example, you already have an industrial operation that's in play. Well, industries have to regularly get permit renewals. They don't just get a permit to operate and they're golden forever. They have to periodically, it's usually about every 5 years, they have to submit for and secure a permit renewal in order to continue their operations. Every single time an industry goes for a permit renewal, there is a government action involved. That becomes an opportunity to get the government to reconsider whether or not the operation of this industry in this location using these practices or failure to include, new technologies that could result in more environmentally protective behaviors at the site, that becomes an opportunity to raise the Pine Tree Amendment to address an operation that's been there for a long time, but how it's allowed to move forward in terms of addressing consequences. So those are just 2 examples. Again, what you're always going to be looking for is what is the government decision or action happening today that is either creating or perpetuating an environmental problem of concern. And then you would, consider whether or not there could be a constitutional argument in that context.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, one of the things we have been saying about this Pine Tree Amendment is that in that sense that Maya was just talking about, it does provide guidance to lawmakers, right? If there's a constitutional amendment there that protects environmental rights, it's going to influence how you make new laws. And so that is kind of a protective and proactive piece of this. But then also, as Maya said too, that there are ways to address existing problems as well.
In the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, the Pennsylvania Attorney General at this point relies frequently on Pennsylvania's Environmental Rights Amendment when he advances enforcement actions and activities. We're seeing the Green Amendment being relied upon to advance good, positive, strong, environmentally protective legislation, to support the vetoing by the governor of bad legislation in the context of single-use plastics. Very recently, we saw a municipality that was really facing a decision. It was a decision that was being hotly debated in the state about, or in the community, about whether to allow a development project to advance on the last stand of woodlands in this quickly urbanizing community. This was like their last patch of nature. And there, the municipal officials, relying on their constitutional duty to protect the natural resources of the state for the benefit of their people, relied upon the Green Amendment in significant part to say this is not the right place or space for this development project. So it really can help advance good, positive, proactive, environmentally protective activities by government, but also, again, be used defensively as a shield to stop bad things that are inflicting harm.
So that's great. And I'm not seeing any more questions, and we're just about to the end of our time. So I, for one, am really glad that all of you could come, and we are welcome to your questions and thoughts that come to you later. You can just email any one of us on the steering committee. But thank you all for coming. And Andy, I don't know if you want to close with any other remarks, but it's been great to speak with you today.
Oops. Yeah, I just wanted to say that I also have been really pleased to have you here. We will send you a follow-up email that will have a link to this recording, so that if there are people in your organization and so on that you would want to share what you've learned, that will be available. And we're also, we are hoping that you will be interested in partnering with us as part of a coalition of businesses that say we support the Pine Tree Amendment and what it's doing, and perhaps even think about ways we're going to be gearing up a public education campaign this summer and fall, and ways that you can not only inform your colleagues and staff, but also customers or people that you come in contact with. We're going to be preparing some materials. So we are really glad to have you here today, and welcome your questions and feedback as you think about what you've learned today. So have a great one. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Thanks so much, and reach out to your legislators as well if you feel you can, and tell them to support this bill. It's LD 489 is the LD number.
Yep. Thanks.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
See you all.
Thank
Good
you.
to see you, Phil.
Likewise, take care.
Bye,
Amy,
Amy.
Beth.